Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on a sunny day in a rather deserted city of Westminster, it must be said, as once again we put the topic of leadership under the spotlight. I'm Scott Challoner and I'm joined on today's programme by Stuart Welton. Stuart is the Managing Director of Welton Media, a digital media production company based in Liverpool, Merseyside. Stuart, welcome to the programme and it's great to have you on the air with us today.
Thank you very much, Scott. Much appreciated.
It's much appreciated, likewise, for you taking the time to come on and speak with me. Now, the purpose of this podcast series is to gather together a variety of distinct perspectives on leadership as a whole. And I think it's fair to say, Stuart, that it's really being put to the test at the moment, isn't it, with the whole COVID-19 pandemic and business leaders having to really feel their way through the crisis. Tell me, for somebody in your line of work, how has it been attempting to navigate the last few weeks? Because I can imagine it's been disruptive on the one hand, but also quite easy to adapt given the nature of what you do.
Oh, Scott, it's just been absolutely crazy for everyone, hasn't it? Nobody knows what's going on. Everyone's scared. Everyone's worried. People's livelihoods are at stake. People's lives are at stake. It's just a really difficult time. So basically, as a managing director of a business, first of all, once we got the lockdown notice, my phone's going mad from my staff, saying, what's going on? I don't feel safe about coming in, all these things, how are we going to move forward? We've got work booked in. Basically, everyone's been really worried about it. And first and foremost is obviously my commitment to my staff is tenfold, isn't it? It's my duty. Obviously, you hear people saying, no, you've got to come in work, we've got things to do. But you know what I mean? I'm a big believer that people, if you look after your staff, they will literally walk over hot coals for you when need be. So it wasn't an issue for me at all. It was, don't worry, guys. You stay at home. I'll keep you completely informed. Let me get into the office tomorrow. Let me speak to clients tonight and rework schedules and just let everyone know that, obviously we're adapting to the COVID-19 outbreak. And people be working from home, and we're still prepared and equipped to run our business effectively in this way for a lot of our clients. So it was a case of just being saying, don't be worried about contacting us. We know that you're worried as well because we market for you. And the last thing you can do is leave people with half-finished jobs. So my job as the managing director was to make sure that, my staff were all looked after and all safe and things like that. And also to make sure that our clients weren't left high and dry. They needed their products, their jobs finishing so they could still market in a certain way through the COVID-19 outbreak. So it was a case of juggling a few hats, to be honest. I had to look after the business on one side and wait to see what the government was going to do about that in the early days, look after the staff and also look after our clients as well.
It's a very admirable approach, but also a very difficult one to take, having to juggle all of that, it sounds, Stuart. But I think for those people like yourself who've really been proactive in making sure that their staff are really, really well informed, when under a lot of pressure to provide answers quickly, even when there's a lot of uncertainty and those answers may not be clear, it's those people like yourself who will be seeing some real benefits in the sense that their staff, as you say, will walk over hot coals for you. They'll be getting their heads down, they'll be mucking in, whether they're on site or working from home, and just really ploughing on for the good of the business. And that's so important, isn't it? That attitude as a leader of really showing that you care about those around you makes it so much easier to take people with you.
Well, it's got to be, because obviously I try and almost sell the dream. I mean, I've been doing this has been my business for 12 years. And my approach is that even though I'm the MD of the company, we're all in it together. I mean, you'll see me hoover in the office, you'll see me taking out the bins. So they know there's not really that much of a hierarchy. It's a big team effort. But even in that sense, when things do go wrong, they're going to look for me for leadership and direction. So I have to look after them. They're young people, they've got families, they've got wives or husbands, and they've got mortgages. So they're basically saying to me, Stu, what are we going to do? Am I going to lose my job? And my first answer was, no, you are not. We will get through this. We have a successful business. We can take a bit of a hit. I'll work with you, work with the government, keep you informed. So some people have been furloughed and we've made sure that they're financially safe. Others, because they can do their job from home, I'm still speaking to them near enough every day to work in a different way, basically, so that clients can still get their jobs that they need doing. We can still supply a service to certain people and just try and keep everyone's morale up and keep everyone's head above water.
There was a hugely important quality of being a leader that you mentioned there, Stuart, for sure, and that was that humility, as you say, showing that you're willing to essentially be on a level with your employees and not just keep them informed, but also lead from the front. Absolutely right, especially in times of crisis. And when we're seeing people really going above and beyond during this time as well to keep business running, do you think that there are some benefits to be drawn from this experience of employees and leaders going out of their comfort zones?
Well, yes, definitely. Well, as I said before, how you look after your staff. I run a business where I completely trust every one of my staff. They know my ethos as a business owner. That's why I call the company Welton Media. I use my surname because I have certainly a unique way of working where it's about honesty, it's about trust, it's about caring, no matter what the job. And because they know that, they basically know what I expect of them as well. So that when times are tough, I do expect them to come out fighting and basically say to me, what can I do to help? How can I support you? Because at the end of the day, if my business folds, then they're out of a job as well. So they need to help me as they need me as much as I need them, so we can work together as a team. It's very much that team ethos that I really do promote here. And obviously with the adversities of COVID-19, it has been, hasn't it, backs against the wall. So it's in times like this, and you see in communities all over the country, people come together and try and work together to make sure people are safe and people are going to be okay.
Exactly right, because without that team of people around you, without surrounding yourself with people who are positive and are going to really get the best out of you as a leader, but also you can nurture the best out of them, it's like you're not really leading anything as such, are you? So picking those people and also picking your mentors to a degree is also quite important. And if we think about that for a moment, Stuart, as well, and the qualities that are so important in positive team members, what sort of aspects do you look for when it comes to the recruitment side of things?
Well, it's because obviously, in a nutshell, we're a creative agency. We do media marketing, digital marketing, all that type of thing. So a lot of our clients, it's not their forte. So they come to us literally with these big puppy dog eyes, with their hands open. Stu, what can you do for us? What do we need to do? So I need people around me when I'm recruiting and things like that who are very polite, very welcoming. People are scared when they're working with us because they've never done it before. So people who are friendly, people who will hold our clients' hands and be there no matter what, to assist them, give them advice. You know, I'm a big believer that every time somebody picks up you pick up the phone to somebody, you don't charge for that. Where's the free advice service gone? You know, if you look after your clients, they'll only spend with you later down the line a little bit more anyway. So I require my staff, as I said before about walking over hot coals, to do whatever the client requests and to help them and suggest to them and be more creative. And be a friend to our clients so that they know they're going to pick up the phone. They know every member of the staff's names. They can tell when they speak to my staff that our staff are smiling when they're on the phone to them. So it's always a joyous, welcoming time getting in touch with Welton Media and doing a job with Welton Media, knowing that you're going to get the friendly approach, the creative approach, and looked after. And that is basically the ethos of myself and the business. So therefore, that is what I expect of every one of my employees.
And I think that requires an awful amount of adaptability, doesn't it? Just as people management does in being a leader as well, because no one approach necessarily works for the same person across the board. So managing that is also hugely important, and being able to adapt your approach to know when to be a little bit more soft with certain people, when to be a little bit more upfront, firm with others. That's also quite important, isn't it?
Oh, definitely, Scott. I mean, they see it from me. I expect them to learn from me. In the office. I mean, I've been in this game over 20 years, so I'd like to think I know what I'm doing. For example, one of my editors, I'd worked with him in a previous job. I was his mentor there. Then he went off to work with another company for a few years, and I started my business. And then 5 years ago, I was able to bring him on board again. And I found that I knew he was a lovely guy, but he picked up a few bad habits from his old employee. And it took him a while to get back into the way that I work, where it's, I want him to be creative. I want him to think out of the box. I want them to put their own style onto things. Because, it's not just me who's right. What my flair is different to somebody else's flair. So I want them to put their unique stamp and their creative experiences onto every piece of work they do. And then we'll sit together as a team and say, what do you think, Stu? What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And we'll go through it all together and come up with the best thing for that client, really. So really, to almost say that the structure is that there's no structure, if you know what I mean, Scott. That I want them to approach every job completely differently with a blank piece of paper or blank TV screen, and really get to know that client and see what they want, what are their needs, and put their own style to it and their own creativity.
I think it's important to sometimes take a little bit of a backseat in that sense and let people take their own form of leadership and be independent.
Not my way or the highway.
It's hugely important. And having talked about sort of that own sort of leadership style that you've taken on yourself, Stuart, what would you say have been some of the influences throughout your life and your career that have sort of rubbed off on that style?
Having bad bosses is one, to be honest. In my career, I've had a few bosses where I think they've lacked slight leadership. I think they've approached their staff in a very almost father and children way type of thing, where you're going to get told off or you do it their way. And I just don't think people benefit from that. I really don't. Not in this day. If you're 5 minutes late from work, you don't need to get chastised for that, do you? There might have been something on the motorway. You don't know. And I don't expect them then just to stay 5 minutes after when they're meant to finish work. Stuff happens in life. As I said, if you look after your staff, they will look after you as well. So the advice that I've picked up or can give to people is remember what it was like to be an employee and the gripes you had with your bosses. So in a corny phrase, I'm just trying to be the best boss ever type of thing, because I've worked with people who I think should have done things in different ways. I've taken on that experience and thought, how would I approach that differently? How can I work with that person? Do they need telling off? I don't think they do. I think we just need to sit down and talk things through and just be a bit more caring. I just think it's a different world than the 90s when things were a bit harsher in the business place. I think, if I'm employing the right people, Scott, I shouldn't have to do these things, should I? I should just be able to almost not be in the office and know that they're just going to do their job.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that comes back again to people management as well. But also one of the key things that you mentioned there was, as well as people who are mentors and people of influence, one of the biggest teachers in obviously developing people's leadership styles is just experience, isn't it? Experience of working with others, understanding what quite works and what sort of doesn't, and
work,
using that to develop themselves as well.
Yeah, definitely. As I said at the beginning of the interview, with regards to you'll see me doing the hoovering and things, I think it's important that my staff see that as well, to know that I'm not sat here going, you, go and make me a cup of tea, or you, look, it's messy, go and take the bins out. I'll walk into the edit suite and go, John, your bin's looking full, mate, pass it over here, I'm going to take them all out. Or go in and say, would you like a cuppa? Just all muck in together so that they know I'm A, approachable, B, I'm not going to bite their head off, and C, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm going to work together in a team so that we all prosper.
And if you, based upon all of that experience, Stuart, could give some advice to one of those people who was aspiring to be essentially their own boss and start a journey within business for themselves, what advice would you have to give them?
Take it slowly. You're not in a rush. If you want to run your own business, you've been in a place where you've obviously sat there and thought, you know what? You've either thought, I can do this better myself, or where do I want to be in 10 years? They're two of the things that I certainly thought. So that when you're there and you're starting your business, yes, you need to carry on because you'll probably be a sole trader for a little bit at a time. So you need to be the operator. You need to do that, but you also need to learn the business side of things. So just do it in your own time. Learn your business. Learn how to do the finances. Learn all the elements that require you to be a boss and a leader. Because as you bring people on board, they're the old you. So they're going to come to you and ask you these questions about the business and things, and you've got to be in a position to answer them and to mentor them. And you're not in it for the short-term gain. It's obviously something you want to do for the rest of your life if you're starting a business. So it all doesn't have to be all singing and dancing within 6 months. Take your time, let it grow organically. Go and meet people, tell people what you can do. Be happy, be pleasant. Do the odd little bit of work for free. It does help when you're starting out. Show people what you can do. I mean, I've got clients now from 12 years ago, and I can literally map from 12 years ago when I did a job for them for free when I was starting up. And then from that job, they put me in touch with another client 2 years later. I did a few jobs for that client. One of the staff moved to another client. I retained the old one, got the new one as well. And literally from that one job that I did 12 years ago for free, I've now got 9 clients from. And some of them are, big hitters that we're earning good money from. So it does help to do a little bit of free work, show people what you're about. Go to networking things. I know it's scary, but you have to get out your comfort zone.
Exactly.
You have to get used to talking about yourself and about your business. I remember standing up for the first time and my hands were shaking, my heart was pumping, because there was always somebody else to do that role for me, but all of a sudden it was me. And it does take time. I wasn't comfortable talking about the business for a good 2 years. So take your time. You're not in a rush. Take your time, learn the business, read a couple of books. There's a great book out there called The E-Myth Revisited. I'm sure you've heard of it, Scott. It's absolutely wonderful. It was a great bedtime read because it shows you how to be a boss of your business and not work in your business. Businesses can fold because you're too busy looking after you think you're the only one that can do your business in that way because you care so much about it. You've got to be able to let go slightly and give some of the mundane tasks to other people to free up your time to grow the business, learn more about the sectors that you work in.
I think that's incredibly sound advice. It's all about, isn't it, really, not thinking too much about the short term and thinking about the long term and longevity. And
definitely the long term.
And if we do think about that long term, Stuart, before we do wrap things up on the programme today, do give me an idea of what you envision the next 12 months will hold for yourself and for Welton Media in navigating the COVID pandemic, but also what your ambitions may be for beyond that time when we begin to emerge from the other side of this crisis.
Oh, well, Scott, we just before COVID started, we'd had the best 6 months that we'd ever had as a business. We were really, really doing well. So it was a shame that obviously it came about when it came about. Obviously, it's a shame anyway. Nobody wants this virus. But it came when we were doing extremely well. So obviously, you can imagine it's gone from a really busy hustle and bustle. We've got no time on our hands. We're so busy to basically the tap being turned off for 90% of our clients. So it's gone really quiet. But I do expect things to pick up. It has to pick up because people are going to have to market. People are going to have to spend again. People are going to have to showcase their products. People are going to have to get the economy back going again. When that happens, we don't know as of yet. It's all very vague, and it's just a case of watching this space. So it is, the pause button has been pressed, hasn't it, for the next few months. People are starting to come back to work now. So I'm dipping my toe in the water, speaking to people, saying, look, how can we assist you? What do you need doing? Is there any way we can rehash old graphics or old footage just to help you get some branding out there over the next month, and which is quite cost effective. And then, so from those next couple of months, it is going to be, hopefully, people start coming back, our clients come back to us, and we can kick on again and hopefully carry on where we've left off. Very aware that we're going to be in a recession, so it is a case of watching this space a little bit and just tentatively move forward, but at the pace that our clients require us to, and just make sure that I can look after my staff, because the last thing I'm going to do is make anyone redundant, Scott. That is the last thing on my mind. It comes back to the team ethics that I'm trying to promote. I'm not going to be letting anyone go. I'm very confident that ourselves as Welton Media as a business will get through this. I'm staying extremely confident about it. And yeah, just power forward and work as a team.
And I think it's hugely important to maintain that ethos going forward. Certainly seems like that's at the forefront of the strategy for sure.
Stay positive.
And let's hope as well that we do begin to see that upward trajectory coming back sooner rather than later once we do emerge from this situation. I have to say, Stuart, even though we are just about out of time on the programme today, it's been a real pleasure and a real insightful experience having you on the air with us. So thanks ever so much for that.
Thank you, Scott. I've enjoyed it.
But what I also think would be unbelievable for the listeners is actually maybe when we start to see things changing in the next few months, we could perhaps have you back on to look at this retrospectively and catch up on how the business is going, by which time hopefully that upward trajectory will very much be back on the agenda. But as I say, it's
definitely, Scott. Yeah, definitely.
As I say, it's been fantastic having you on the air with us today, Stuart, and do take care and do stay safe with everything still going on for the minute.
Yeah, you stay safe as well, Scott, and I'll catch up with you shortly. Thanks for the call.
Certainly so. That was Stuart Welton, the Managing Director of Welton Media in Liverpool. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Matthew O'Neill for his exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett. Lord David Blunkett is an active member of the House of Lords, a former Labour MP and Secretary of State, and also the chairman of the Leaders' Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Despite being blind from birth, Lord Blunkett is one of the most prominent politicians of his generation, having held a number of senior positions in Tony Blair's cabinet and having served as the MP for the Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough constituency for 28 years. Lord Blunkett was first elevated to the House of Lords, anointed Baron Blunkett of Brightside and Hillsborough back in August of 2015. I hope you enjoyed listening just as much as Matthew enjoyed speaking with Lord Blunkett, and that's coming up next.
Lord Blunkett, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be with you.
Well, of course, nothing is being said at the moment other than COVID-19, which we must touch on. What would your message be to small businesses who are trying to keep going?
Well, I think the last ones standing will be the ones that thrive when we get back to some sort of normality. So it's have confidence and courage. Obviously, take advantage as far as you can of the government help. I think that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has gone about as far as you could have expected in the circumstances. There are obviously small businesses that fall between the cracks. Those who don't have defined premises can't benefit from the business rate waiver, have not really been able to demonstrate that they can adhere to the PAYE for furloughing staff, and of course whether they can receive the grant, 10,000 or 25,000. All of those who can are obviously able at least to benefit from that for the time being and look to the future. But I think the second thing to say, and they don't need me to tell them this as a politician who did once do a business studies qualification, which is that it will be a different world, and being able to think about how that world will look in a year's time and be creative about it and learn from not just what's happening to you at this moment in time, but to others around you and the sector that you're working in, that will be really important.
Do you feel that the long-term effects of the COVID-19 outbreak will in some ways be positive for British industry?
Well, only in the sense that people are having to be creative, they're having to adjust and innovate. Therefore, they're thinking about more productive, if you like, greater productivity ways of delivering the same service or delivering the same products. And in that sense, I think we'll have temporarily at least very much higher unemployment than we've become used to, but we'll probably have a burst of productivity, which will help with the recovery. Whether it will help with the inequity of the way in which our economy is imbalanced, both between services and productivity and the production of goods and services, I'm not sure. What we will need to try and do is to ensure that the geographic imbalance that exists is, as far as humanly possible, is dealt with by both the entrepreneurship and innovation from the bottom up and targeted government help, which will still be needed. And we are now in the throes of the kind of borrowing that we saw back in 2008 to save the banking and economic system. We're having to do that to save the whole of our productive business and commerce, and I think that will have to be sustained for some time.
Do you feel that people will take a second look at global supply chains in the wake of this outbreak?
I think there's going to be much more creative ways of using local supply and linking up inside sectors much more effectively. And I hope that the Leaders' Council will be able to play a part in that, in the sense that people who have something in common, a synergy in terms of what they're delivering, whether it's a service or whether it's manufacturing or whatever, will be able to see that there's a good outcome from knowing the sector better, linking with people, not just geographically, locally, but those in this country who may not have been on the radar in terms of what they produced for the supply chain. And of course, ensuring, because there's quite a lot of fraud going on as we speak, with people getting into cyber attacks, that they'll also take account of going into the cybersecurity side effectively as well. The more we are online, the more people who are working from home, the more vulnerable those businesses and their supply chain become. And that's something to think about as well.
How important is strong leadership at the moment?
Well, I actually think that it's brought to the fore leadership in a whole range of areas, from obviously government itself, and there's been ups and downs with the Prime Minister's severe illness, but all the way through the public and private sector. People have, to use the jargon, stepped up, and they've shown local, regional, national level the kind of leadership that Britain historically was very good at. Regrettably, we've not seen the same on the international scene for all kinds of reasons, but maybe we will in future. So I think out of this will come experience of people who have seen an opportunity to do good, as well as seen an opportunity to provide a good service or goods, including, for instance, shortages for the health and social care system, the food chain and the like. But also, I think, in terms of seeing the synergy between the private and the voluntary sector, and using people's commitment to each other in a very positive way. I'm not sentimental about this. Things will revert. But actually, I think there's a kind of moment of moral judgment, of people feeling that they've got a role to play outside the immediate survival that they're engaged in. And if we can hang on to a little bit of that social responsibility, that will be a very positive outcome.
Absolutely. Now, what's your broad view of how the government is responding to this? Are you broadly supportive of their measures?
Well, it may surprise people to hear that I have been very supportive. Of course, there's been legitimate criticisms about the speed of response on protective equipment and on issues relating to testing. But my own view is very similar to the challenge that was made to the Prime Minister of Italy, when people said, why didn't you close Italy down faster? And he said, a fortnight before we did it, I would have been considered to be a madman, and nobody would have agreed to do it if I'd tried to move too quickly. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on here in the UK. We may have seen the signals elsewhere across the world and taken them more seriously at the time. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but as someone who's had his life in the opposite political party to the present government, I think that with some hiccups and mistakes, they've not done a bad job in what has been incredibly difficult circumstances.
And you're absolutely right. In a liberal democracy that we live in, it's very difficult for people to swallow orders given to them from government.
Well, the UK and the US, and to some extent the Scandinavian countries, have a very different history and therefore interest in maintaining the freedom to decide and the persuasion and consent that's required. Those countries that have experienced one way or another totalitarianism over the last century have a slightly different way of coming at this. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I think that that's why getting the balance right of getting people to go along with what you want them to do in their interests as well as the nation as a whole is a sensible, proportional balance. And I think we now need to adjust to the coming out of the crisis gradually, readjusting to recovery in the same way.
Now, something you've mentioned recently on this balance is the police overreach in the enforcement of the COVID-19 structures that have been put in place. What have they done right, and where have they gone too far?
Well, I think that they were interpreting what was not necessarily as clear advice as it might have been for all kinds of reasons, because people were feeling their way. I think what's come out of it has been a demonstration by local police services in some parts of the country that they could get people to do what was needed without the heavy hand of drones overhead or people being told that they shouldn't be walking in the street, because this was all about self-isolation, not incarceration. It was about getting people not to pass the infection on to each other and therefore to provide distance rather than to make our lives a misery. Those police services that adopted that policing by consent and chivying people along did really well. Those who went over the top, I think, soon got a very substantial pushback. And one of the strengths of our democracy is that you could have that debate. People could say, I'm terribly sorry, we think the police force in our area has gone over the top. And that in itself is a constraint and a readjustment. That's another strength of living in a country where you can have opinions and express them without actually being thought to be a fool.
Now, of course, the government has faced criticism that they were slow to react, and Boris Johnson wasn't present at the early COVID-19 COBRA meetings. Now, Number 10 has claimed that this is normal practice. The health secretary often chairs COBRA meetings related to health. Does this tally with your experience as a Secretary of State, or would you have expected the PM to be more hands-on during the initial stages?
I think different prime ministers do have a very different style. And Boris's style, which I think will now be considerably adjusted, was very swashbuckling. In some senses, delegating is a good thing, as every leader of every business or public service knows. Those who try to pull too much into themselves end up with a massive bottleneck, great failure of trust, and the inability of people to show what they're worth and to demonstrate their capability. So I'd be very wary of jumping in and saying he was wrong to delegate the essential COBRA meetings. What I was surprised about was that he didn't chair the first couple, because my experience with Tony Blair for the 8 years I was in Cabinet was that Tony was a great delegator, but he would get a grip to begin with, watch what the difficulties were, and then give people direction and confidence to be able to get on with it. So looking back, I think Boris himself probably thinks, God, I wish I'd spotted the signals from elsewhere in the world more rapidly, and I'd just been there. However, this also raises another issue. All of us in positions of leadership need good teams around us. I think after this is over, he will be assessing those who really did step up and those who demonstrated their inadequacy. I think we'll probably end up in a year's time with a much stronger cabinet than we have today.
Well, absolutely. And of course, we've seen a significant drop in the visibility of certain special advisors like Dominic Cummings during this entire period. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out.
Well, it's certainly readjusted the role of those behind the scenes with those who should be taking the decisions, having received advice. Obviously, there's been a complete transformation in the profile of experts, if I might use that term, who'd previously been denigrated. Scientists, medics, people with behavioral science understanding. My only criticism was, were we getting wide enough advice? Were we narrowing it too much to a couple of key centres in London? But that's because I've always been adverse to everything being London-centric. I think there's great expertise, wisdom, experience out in the sticks, and we should use it.
Rightly so. Now, was pandemic planning part of your time as a minister, particularly perhaps when you were Home Secretary?
Well, it was, but it was on the back of risk arising out of counter-terrorism measures.
Right.
I was the Home Secretary for 3 months when the attack took place in September 2001 on the World Trade Center and beyond. We did an enormous amount of scenario planning, both desktop and real. On the back of that, it was very heavily orientated to future developing terrorism risk. I certainly got involved with talking about pandemics. I remember being at a seminar in Edinburgh where the university there had done a lot of work itself on the issue of pandemics. And of course, we saw SARS and other things emerging. I think people have criticized the government for not picking up the report from 2015, 5 years ago. I think that what happens is human nature kicks in. You deal with what you're immediately faced with. You can sponsor reports, and this is true of business planning, of course, as well, and scenario planning for what business continuity will look like, recovery plans for business, what will happen if there's a cyber attack, what happens if there's an energy shutdown. These kind of things you can look at, but you're immediately turning your eyes to what's in front of you. And had we picked up a bit more on the danger from Ebola and SARS and what have you in the past, then we might have said, what if something hits us in the developed nations that we don't have a vaccine for, that we can't immediately whisk up protective materials or equipment, or for that matter, medicines that help with recovery, all of which we now see are a danger. I think this will make an enormous difference to the planning for the years ahead. I hope it will be widened so that we don't just look at what's happened, but very rarely do you see something exactly repeat itself. Some of the circumstances will be, but others won't. So that's why I've put emphasis in what I talk about on looking at the other virus, the cyber attack scenario, which could be just as dangerous in a world of just-in-time provision. One of the miracles of the modern developed world, except for the very poor, has been the distribution of food. A lot of it on computerized, technologically advanced systems. If that were to come down, we'd be in real trouble. So I think we need to think those sort of scenarios as well.
So have a full plan across both sectors, biological warfare, pandemics, and cyber warfare.
Yes, and to do so on different levels. I think, again, thinking global but acting local, we need a lot more to think about what would happen if something took shape that actually broke down those national and global chains and how we would cope. And without, obviously, we've got enough fear and anxiety to last a lifetime. Without creating even more anxiety, we can think about those things for the future in a more rational way, I think.
Now, aside from the physical threat of the virus, one of the things that people are vastly worried about is the effect on the economy, not just national economy, but also the world economy. Now, it has been said by certain parties, and I'd like to garner your thoughts on this. Is there a danger of the effects of the lockdown being even worse than those of the virus?
Were it be prolonged, I fear that balance would tip the other way. It is about proportionality. It is about balance. It's the wisdom of Solomon, really, to get the moment right when you start to move and then to move quickly. There's no doubt whatsoever that we are stocking up, not just on the economic and employment front, which will be devastating enough, but on the health and social well-being front, enormous challenges, and they will need careful handling because there's a lot of people whose lives, for a variety of reasons, are at risk in the future, on a scale that we've been dealing with over the immediate handling of the pandemic, concentrating really hard on those affected by COVID-19, those sadly who have died or been seriously incapacitated, that will roll over into the economic, the social, the mental health and cultural well-being of the nation, and that will need all of us to pull together as well.
Absolutely. Now, do you believe the government's doing enough for business?
I think that the speed of reaction once the scale of the pandemic was clear was very good. I've praised Rishi Sunak for his action. Remember, a chancellor who only just come into office was planning to deliver the budget in the middle of March and has had at least three equivalent budgets since. I think he's handled it very well. Understandably worried now about what we're doing to our economy. The level of borrowing is sustainable because of low interest rates, but it reaches a point, of course, where it tips over so that you can't then do the kind of structural investment requirements that the government were laying out before and in the March budget. And those will have their consequences as well as a planned payback over many years. I think we've learned something over the last few months. We needed to take immediate action. We don't want another round of austerity equivalent from 2010 through to 2019. I don't think the nation, on the back of what's happened and the challenges we have, could take that. And therefore, we need a different plan, economic plan, over a much longer period, just as we did from the Second World War all the way through to 2002, when the final American loans were paid off.
Now, of course, one thing that's on everyone's lips, how much longer do you believe that the lockdown can go on for?
I believe that we need to be substantially back in action as an economy in June. This obviously is led in terms of places where people would meet in large numbers, having to adjust to the fact that it will be longer for them. And sadly, that will involve business closures. It's why the Chancellor extended the furlough scheme to the end of June. Mm-hmm. But unless we get things moving in June, I think we'll run into the summer where all kinds of services and industries will have a chain reaction effect. And what happens with one will then have a major impact on another. And then you get the skittle effect where things get knocked down that you hadn't perceived were going to be affected. So I very much, if I were in government, and I always think of things in that context, what would I do if I were in government? I would be on the side from the second week in May, on the side of the hawks in terms of saying we've got to start moving, and we've got to do so with the collaboration and cooperation of the public who have got the message, who did behave, who responded magnificently. Let's try and get back, perhaps, doing things differently for a time, but substantially getting back to business as usual. And unless we do that, then those areas that can't and wouldn't expect to be back in action immediately get pushed further into the middle of the year and the autumn, and then they become unsustainable.
Now, of course, one of the other major developments we've had recently are the changes in the Labour Party. So if we could just speak on the Labour Party for a while. This might sound like an obvious question, but how does Sir Keir differ from Mr. Corbyn?
Well, I'm biased because I believe the Labour Party has come out of 4.5 years of a black hole of a nightmare, where it neither represented a credible opposition nor an electable government. And the combination was to let those who supported the Labour Party and needed some of its policies let them down very badly. Sir Keir Starmer both is a highly intelligent, professional lawyer who, as Director of Public Prosecutions, led the service well, had to take difficult decisions at a time of austerity, understands the world beyond Labour members, but has been able to do business with those who originally supported Jeremy Corbyn and was able to command support from them. His creation of a balanced shadow ministerial team has been very encouraging. I supported Lisa Nandy, who he's made Shadow Foreign Secretary, because I thought she understood the north of England and the disaffected former Labour voters. But I believe that Sir Keir has taken on board those who have something really sensible to offer, and I believe he will be both a great leader of the opposition. More importantly, he will then present himself as a credible alternative Prime Minister. And all governments need an alternative government at their shoulder. It was true of us from 97, and it took the Conservatives some time to recover and to get to that position, but they did, and the Labour Party will, and that's crucial for our democracy. All of us need to understand and appreciate that a living, breathing, functioning democracy requires a credible, confident, and in many ways supportable opposition, as well as a government that we clearly want to do well, because none of us want, as we didn't with the COVID crisis, none of us want the government to fail. We want to see our economy recover. We want our social well-being to be taken into account. We want to overcome deep-seated inequality and poverty, and we want to do it with enterprise and entrepreneurship and business playing their role. And that is about leadership nationally, locally, in the private and the public sector, people with ideas, with confidence, with the ability to pull teams around them, above all, to have some idea of what it is they want to achieve and a very good idea as to how to achieve it.
Now, of course, one of the biggest problems Sir Keir is facing will be tackling the party's anti-Semitism problem. There has been a recent internal report that has been quite damning. What's your response to that report, and what does Sir Keir need to do in response?
Well, there are two reports. One which is being produced by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which he will, and has already indicated, will implement in full. The second was a leaked report put together by the supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, 800 pages of private interchanges on social media, which he has, Keir Starmer, set up an investigation to identify who did it, who leaked it, what the content was, does it have any salience and lessons for us, and where necessary, action will be taken. So I hope that as he moved very quickly to reassure the Jewish community, so he will be able to take the necessary steps to back up that reassurance with the kind of actions that says that this was a blight on a historic, great political party that all of us were ashamed of. We've been able to put that behind us and to move on to facing the future with confidence.
What's the one key thing that Sir Keir needs to do to restore Labour as an election-winning party?
I think Sir Keir Starmer's major challenge is to convince sceptical voters that Labour has not only reverted to a party that they can support because they can see it acting, developing, presenting as a credible alternative government, but also that the lessons have been learned from the fiasco from 2015 onwards. In other words, there have to be very clear signals of substantial change, not just the right words, not just reassurance that we're not going back to some of the crazier policies, but actually that we've understood why the electorate rejected those policies so substantially in December 2019. If people get that message, they'll understand that the Labour Party has changed, as it did in the 1980s and early 90s to become the electable government with the greatest majority and historic majority, even greater than 1945, which I was privileged to be able to take advantage of in 1997 when I joined the cabinet.
Now, I know what your answer is going to be to this question, but indulge me. Do you think Sir Keir has what it takes to be PM?
Yes, I do. I think he has the background, he has the experience, he has the professionalism, he has the forensic mindset, and he has the confidence to have put a team around him which will ensure that it will work. And those elements are true of all leaders. Ideas, the ability to build a team, to have confidence in that team, and to be able to demonstrate leadership in practice, sometimes at the most difficult times. And, you know, the Leaders' Council, those sharing their thoughts with the kind of thing that we're doing now with a podcast, but also joining us in linking up in that network of people who can support and help each other and learn from each other. That is what needs to be done in politics as it needs to be done in business. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew.
Well, thank you for coming on the program. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much, and good luck to all those listening in what has been a nightmare scenario. Good luck for the future. Have courage, have confidence, and yes, listen to those who know more about business than I ever will.
Thank you, Lord Plunkett.
Thank you.
This has been the Leaders' Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders' Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.